is Calvin Brockington. He's 24 years old. His date of birth is March 4th, 1998. He was living at 2020 18th Avenue South in St. Petersburg. He's now living in the Pinellas County Jail, and I certainly hope, based upon everything we've seen in the last couple of days and the evidence that's been uncovered in this case, that his permanent address for the rest of his life is going to be in a Florida State prison, because this is a guy that certainly has not learned his lesson. He tried to kill 2 cops and is really, in my view, given up his right to live in society among us. It's really a terrible situation, and when you look at the facts, you look at the circumstances of this thing, and you think about a man at 24 years old who is engaged in what this guy is engaged in and the conduct that he's engaged in and not learned his lesson. It shows you the challenges we deal with every day and that cops across this country deal with, and frankly society is dealing with, as we have seen an increase in violent crime, and we've seen the people that have disregard for others. So with Brockington, as I said, he's 24 years old, and as a juvenile, before he turned 18, he was arrested 8 times. Since turning 18, he has spent 3 years in state prison. So since he was 18 years old, he spent 3 years in state prison. That means, and do the math, that he spent 3 years on the street as a free person. During those 3 years, he's been arrested for 25 different crimes. So I didn't even put up here the juvenile crimes, those 8 juvenile crimes. I put it up here since he's been 18, and he's only been out of prison for 3 years of the 6 years since he turned 18, is that he's been arrested for all of that. Grand theft, burglary, resisting an officer, violation of probation, grand theft motor vehicle, robbery with a firearm, attempted carjacking, and all of that. So finally in 2017, he goes to state prison. And he spends 3 years, as I said, in the Florida Department of Corrections in the state prison system. And that was for attempted carjacking and carrying a concealed firearm. So after getting out of state prison in December of 2020, again, this man who was younger and spending 3 years, as he gets out, decides the way to properly reintegrate into society, to become productive, to get his act together and not wreak havoc out there, as opposed to doing what he should do and support his kids and get a job and live peacefully and productively among us. He decides that he's going to become a drug dealer down in St. Petersburg. And between March of 2021 and April of 2022, he sold drugs to undercover detectives of the St. Petersburg Police Department 17 times. And he's now been charged with all of those 17 counts of sale and possession and trafficking in drugs. And you can see those are listed out there. So that leads us to this incident and event. Brockington's, I guess we would describe as former girlfriend, Sandy Rolson, R-O-H-L-S-E-N, over the last year or so has called law enforcement many times because of incidents that she was having with him, complaints including domestic violence type situations. While they are not now together, she is nonetheless pregnant with his child. She's 3 months pregnant. On this past Tuesday evening, she ran into Brockington in a parking lot in St. Petersburg. He asked her to give him a ride to a location over here in Rainbow Village, which is a residential complex to the west of where we are, because he wanted to see his kids. He's got kids with another woman there, and he wanted to go see his kids in Rainbow Village. So she gave him a ride and said that she would do that as they came out of St. Pete and began heading west on Almerton Road. They got to the intersection of Almerton and US 19, and he went off on her, just as he has done many times in the past. And he began hitting her, striking her in the car, and she realized that the situation was going south again. So she made the decision that she wasn't going to take him over there to Rainbow Village, and she was going to turn around and head back to St. Pete. She decided to pull into this Shell Circle K station at 49th and Almerton, and she told him that she was going in to prepay for the gas. He was in the car, and according to her, when she left the car, he was seated in the right front passenger seat. And that'll be relevant to what I'm going to tell you here in a few minutes. So she goes into the store, and she goes into the bathroom in the Circle K, and she calls 911 and says that Brockington was in the car, he was in the parking lot, told the 911 dispatcher that he was anti-law enforcement, he had a propensity for violence, he may have a warrant outstanding for his arrest, and that she had been battered by him and was again reporting another domestic violence battery situation. So that call, because it's in the city of Pinellas Park, went to the Pinellas Park Police Department, and officers from Pinellas Park Police Department were dispatched to the scene. The first officer to arrive on the scene is Officer Jacob Durr, D-E-R-R. And I'm going to run through this with you, and then I'm going to play some video for you so you can see exactly what happened. But Officer Durr was northbound on 49th Street. He got to the intersection of Ulmerton, and this gas station is on the southwest corner. He made a U-turn, pulled into the parking lot. The information was a little bit confusing as to the type of vehicle and the color of the vehicle, so he wasn't exactly sure. The call note said that he was looking for a black vehicle. It turned out that the vehicle is silver. So when he pulls into the parking lot, he sees a Ford Focus, which is the type of vehicle, and believes that nonetheless, even though the color was wrong, that this was the car that was involved. And at this point, Rolson was still inside the store, inside the bathroom, and talking to the 911 dispatcher. So as Officer Durr approaches the vehicle, and he approached on the driver's side, and you'll see in the video, when Brockington had moved, and he had moved from the right front passenger side to the left rear driver's side. So as Officer Durr was approaching, he was ambushed, and Brockington opened the door and immediately fired on Officer Durr. Officer Durr had absolutely nothing that he could have done. He was completely taken by surprise and completely ambushed by this, and you'll see it was instantaneous as Brockington opened that door. So he moved himself from the right front passenger side to that rear driver's side for a reason. Now, when he did it, I don't know, but it was, again, evident to me at least that he was doing it for the element of surprise and for a, quote, tactical reason. And as the officer was approaching, he definitely caught him by surprise and he ambushed him. The officer was shot in the upper right arm, fractured the bone in his arm, and he went to the ground. It incapacitated the officer where he's right-handed. He could not reach for his gun. He had no use of his right arm. And when the officer goes to the ground, Brockington exits the car and fires 4 more times at the officer. And just because sometimes good things happen in this world, right things happen, is that he missed. But he was within a couple of feet of Officer Durr. When Officer Durr is on the ground and Brockington is firing at him, he fires 4 more times. So he fired a total of 5 times. What we know now is that the weapon that Brockington had was a Smith & Wesson revolver with 6 rounds in it. And again, that will be also relevant to what I'm going to tell you as far as one of Brockington's statements was concerned. He knew the gun he had, he knew how many rounds he had, and he knew how many rounds he fired. He had fired a total of 5. 1 struck Officer Durr, and the other 4 were fired at Officer Durr as he was on the ground. And then Officer Durr, because he was incapacitated and being shot at and couldn't draw his gun, he got up and he ran to a place of safety along the west side of the store. At that point, Brockington, and you'll see in the video, as he ran toward the store to the south, but he didn't immediately go to the store. He actually went to Officer Durr's cruiser. It's a marked Pinellas Park Police Department cruiser. It was parked along the east side of the store. Now, I can't tell from the video, and it's uncertain whether he tried to get in the cruiser, but he definitely ran to the cruiser and was looking in it. And again, he might have been trying to get in it, but I can't tell you that for sure. He then immediately turned around and ran into the store. When he ran into the store, he approached a man who was visiting here from Texas, who had a silver Kia that he had parked at one of the gas pumps outside, just to the west of where Rolson's car was. And he carjacked the guy. He had a gun in his hand, and he told the guy, and you'll hear using an expletive, "Give me your keys," and asked him what kind of car he had and where was it. And this guy who was the victim of the carjacking, of course, concerned, startled, gave him the keys, and Brockington ran out of the store. As he's running out of the store, and he knows what he's got left, At that point is another Pinellas Park police officer, Officer Casey Gavin, had arrived on scene. And she was parked right next to Officer Durr's car. So as Brockington comes out the door, he sees the second Pinellas Park police car, and he sees Officer Gavin, and he shoots at her. At that point, after he shot at Officer Gavin, he ran to the west toward the Kia, which is the car he had gotten the keys from the victim inside the store. He gets there, he's trying to open it, he crouches down, you can see him take a position to cover. He gets into the car. When he gets into the car, he starts to move and make a U-turn. He starts to move, and he kind of comes this way in a semicircle. At that point, Officer Gavin fired one round at him, and he then made the turn, the circle, and he went north through the parking lot into the eastbound lanes of Almerton Road. So he is going now, he's in the eastbound lanes, but he's going westbound. So he's going against all that traffic. One of our deputies, a deputy from the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, happened to be at that intersection of 49th and Almerton. Again, this was being responded to by Pinellas Park or on separate radio channels. He knew there was some commotion, but he hadn't heard anything and hadn't heard what was going out over the radio, but he knew something was wrong. So the deputy made a U-turn, and as Brockington was traveling in the stolen car that he carjacked, as he was going west in the eastbound lanes, is that the deputy was going west. Brockington moved over into the westbound lanes, now going westbound. He gets to the light at 58th Street in Almerton, and Brockington makes a U-turn and now is heading back eastbound in the eastbound lanes. So the deputy got on the radio, and he got up on the Pinellas Park channel, told them what was happening, and the guy now wasn't going west, he's going east. So an officer from the Pinellas Park Police Department and one of our canine deputies set up to the east on Almerton Road, and they saw the car. That car traveled down Roosevelt Boulevard, it got on I-275, and he knew that deputies and officers were behind him. They tried to initially stop the car at about 54th Avenue North and 275, and at one point on I-275, he was traveling about 150 miles an hour, and he was fleeing down 275, driving absolutely recklessly with total disregard for anyone's safety, and again, the speeds were about 150 miles an hour at one point. Brockington gets off I-275 at 28th Street South, and he is continuing to flee up and down side streets, trying to get away from the law enforcement officers that were involved. And one of our deputies who was working down there saw the car. He was in an unmarked car, and that deputy is Deputy Brandon Lundy. Deputy Lundy, when he saw Brockington's car, he tried to perform what we call a precision immobilization technique or a pit technique, which is to bump the car to cause it to spin out and stop it. But what happened, and again, because of the speeds and a number of other factors that were involved, when Deputy Lundy performed the pit maneuver, is that he actually locked up with Brockington's car, went up on two wheels. When he came back down, because of the hard driving that was going down there, Deputy Lundy didn't have any brakes, and he hit a tree head on. Deputy Lundy did at about 55 miles an hour. Deputy Lundy broke his foot, injured his shoulder, and had other injuries, not life-threatening, but significant injuries as a result of that. At that point, Brockington veered off, and he ran into a house at 928 22nd Avenue South. So as all that's unfolding, we had a lot of deputies, a lot of law enforcement officers who responded to this. We had two other deputies that were involved in a collision at 5th Avenue North and 49th Street. One of them broke his finger in that. The other had some minor injuries, but they'll be fine. So there was a total in all of this. You had Deputy Lundy, who broke his foot. You had the two other deputies in the wreck, and you had Officer Durr, who was shot. In the vehicle, as I said, was this .38 caliber revolver. It is not, we're trying to figure out where it came from. The last record we have on that revolver was, the last purchase that we could find for it was in 1980 in Miami. The person who purchased it is now a woman in her 80s who lives up north. We're following up on it. It hasn't been reported as stolen, but it has all the appearances that it's a crime gun that's just been passed around for many, many years. So as we look at photograph of Brockington over here, you see the area where the shooting occurred. You see the shooting, where the shooting ended. You got a summary there of all of his charges and his activities over time. So we brought him here to the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. Detectives were going to try and interview Brockington. And as he was waiting, he was being watched by deputies. And they were just in a room with him, and he started blurting stuff out, just out of the blue. And one of the things that he said, and this is captured on audio tape, he said, my record isn't that extensive. So I'm like, damn, 20 years for jumping on somebody. I might as well go out with the whole shebang. So I guess he thinks this 33 times of being charged with crimes isn't that big a deal, and he is going to go out with the shebang. But here's the most troubling thing, and one of the most troubling things I've heard in a long time come out of somebody's mouth from this guy who just shot a police officer, shot at another one, is that he says, with a shot left, I could have killed the man. And he knew that he had fired 5 times and he had 6 rounds. Because again, when he came out of the store and he shot at Officer Gavin, he had 1 round left, that was it. And he actually pointed off for her again, but he didn't have any more ammunition left. And thankfully, it was a revolver, it only had 6 rounds. Because if it was a semi-automatic handgun and it had a magazine in it with multiple rounds, there would have been a real serious gunfight out there. And so he knew exactly what he was doing, and he said that with a shot left, I could have killed the man. So no question that he had every intent of killing Officer Durr and Officer Gavin. And I'm not even crying, and I'm about to catch 30 or 40 years of my life. Well, guess what? Because of his history and because he's what we call here in Florida a prison release reoffender, a PRR, is that thankfully, and if this system works the way it's supposed to work, is it won't be 30 or 40 years. It'll be a mandatory life sentence, and that's what this guy needs. And he has forfeited his right to live among us, and he needs to be in prison for the rest of his life. And hopefully that's what happens. And he says, I don't feel no different. Well, Officer Durr feels different. Officer Gavin feels different from what they went through out there. And this guy obviously didn't get it. So he's now where he belongs, in the county jail. I'm going to run through for you, and just you have to bear with us for a second. We're going to lower the screen. I'll play this, and I'll ask Chief Hayworth to come up and make any remarks that he wants to make, and you can ask any questions. So what I'm going to do with this is that we have video. I'm going to run through it one time, and then probably run through it a second time. I'm just going to let it play the first time. I'll run through it a second time, and then explain and put some things in context for you. And then, as I said, Chief Hayworth can make any comments that he wants to make, and then we'll take any questions that you have. So. All right, so I'm going to back this up here and just kind of walk you through this now. So right here, you've got Officer Durr. He's northbound on 49th Street. This is Almerton Road, and he's going to make the U-turn. Is Brockington, the car that he's in, is sitting right here at the gas pumps. Officer Durr makes the U-turn. And as you can see here, the car that was eventually carjacked, the victim, he's parked here at these pumps facing to the south, furthest west pumps, and Brockington's car is right over here as Officer Durr is getting ready to pull in to the gas station parking lot. You'll see the person who was in the store who gave up his keys, he's getting out of the car, the man from Texas. And again, you can see him here. So this is the same, this is just a different view. This is Officer Durr's dash cam from his car. These are cameras there at the gas station. So the carjacked victim's now in the store. There's Officer Durr, you can see on his dash camera, and then you'll pick him up on the gas pump's camera as he comes into view over here. And at some point, Brockington moved from the front seat to the rear seat. Officer Durr is going up and approaching the vehicle. You can see here it's the same activity, same action. See, he opens the door as Officer Durr is approaching. He shoots. So you can see here, Officer Durr goes down on the ground, and you'll see Brockington get out, and so he fires 4 more times. So Officer Durr said that he realized he couldn't get his gun out of the holster, and he knew he had to run because he was obviously had been shot at in a fear that he was going to be killed. So he did all he could do, which was to run. Officer Durr, there's actually video, and I'm not going to show it to you. It's just he ran around the west side of the building, down to the south side, and he took a position of cover over here in the back. Now at this point, what you're seeing is you're seeing Brockington here. This is Officer Durr's car. As I was telling you when I first gave you the overview of this, is that Brockington ran here, and he didn't go inside. He actually ran to Officer Durr's cruiser, and you'll see that here. So here he goes. He's coming to Officer Durr's cruiser, stops. Now he's leaving Officer Durr's cruiser. He's going inside. Now this is the clerk inside the convenience store. She had heard the shots, and she was going to try and lock the door to the convenience store. As she's approaching the door to lock it, Brockington's coming in, and he's got the gun in his hand. You can see the gun in his hand right there. And right there, and he, as you saw here in the previous screen, is that Officer Gavin is right here. He's out, and he fires at Officer Gavin as he's going over to the Kia that he's getting ready to steal. You can see here with his arm extended, is he's got his arm extended to the east, and he's firing at Officer Gavin. And again, this is Officer Gavin here, is that she had gotten out of her cruiser. That's her car there. That's Officer Durr's cruiser. And she now sees him over there behind the gas pumps and getting into the cruiser. You can see here when you look at it, he was actually ducking down here for a second. This is where he goes out to Almerton, and he goes west in the eastbound lanes. Now, this is Officer Gavin. She decided that she was going to try and go out there and see where he was going and see if she could get a tag. Obviously, she couldn't outrun the car, and by the time she got out there, all she saw was Brockington traveling west in the eastbound lanes. And this is Officer Durr here. Now he comes around the corner and stays here. You can see his right arm is just kind of dangling there. He's incapacitated. And what ends up happening eventually, and I'm not going to show you the video of it, but the person who was carjacked, the victim in the carjacking, he comes out of the store He comes up to Officer Durr. Officer Durr has obviously been shot and incapacitated. Officer Durr takes out his tourniquet and he hands it to that man who was the victim of the carjacking and asks him to put it on, tells him he needs help. And so the victim of the carjacking put the tourniquet on Officer Durr's arm and rendered aid to him. So now this is Officer Durr's body-worn camera. Everything else you've seen is dash camera and cameras from the Circle K. This is now a body-worn camera from Officer Durr. The same thing you've seen, but it's a different view. It's from his body-worn camera. This you've already seen. Now, when you see it again here, we're slowing it down best we can. So this is slowed down. It's the same thing. It just slowed down. You can see he opens the door. There you go. And you can see right there. And so you can see this is a freeze frame of it. And you can see, again, Durr's right here. There's Brockington. Looks like he's got both hands on the gun, as we would call a point shoulder stance, and he just pops open that door and he ambushes them. He just shoots right out the door, and you can see there he's got the gun in his hand. So we'll make this video available if you want to turn on the lights and raise the screen. So we'll make this video available to everybody. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Hayworth for a minute, and then either one of us will take any questions that you have.
Thanks, Sheriff. So first things first, our police officer is well. He had surgery yesterday. With a lot of luck, he should be out today and start his recovery. We expect him to make a full recovery and return to duty with the citizens of Pinellas Park's Police Department within the next 3 to 6 months. As the sheriff has gone through our incident from the other night, one, I just want to be able to thank the task force that has put all of this investigation together. Look, this is not going to be done. It's not easy to put all of these things together in this context that you see today. It was very chaotic out there. You have to figure there was not only a shooting scene at 49 in Ulmerton, there was also a scene down in South St. Pete where a pursuit had taken place to take the suspect into custody. And that was not going to be done by just one particular agency. And I think that that's one of the things that I want to thank all of Pinellas County law enforcement for, right? Not only our presence in the task force that allows us to put context to our officer-involved shootings and things like that, but also the support that we all received once the call went out that an officer had been shot, a suspect was on the loose, and we were able to rally the troops to get him into custody. Thanks to the City of St. Petersburg's Police Department, like I said, our task force, Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, and our police department, this couldn't have been done. I also want to thank our friends in the fire service that rendered aid to Officer Durr at the time of need, and also certainly the medical professionals down at Bayfront Hospital that were able to quickly get the medical treatment that he needed. Look, these things are tremendously scary to everybody, right? You figure our police officers are being dispatched to a domestic, and it turns into that. It's something that our officers do, at least in the city of Pinellas Park, probably 10 or 12 times a day. So it's hard to know which exactly the one is going to be where someone is going to try to take the officer's life, the officer's partner's life, and then create such a danger for everybody in our community. The sheriff did a really good job about telling you the history of Brockington, but he is certainly not alone. Our community is littered with folks, and it's making our job a whole lot harder. He's certainly not the first, he's not going to be the last, but I will tell you, in the city of Pinellas Park anyways, over the last probably year, there have been many of our calls for service could have turned into that, and I'm sure the sheriff and our friends in St. Pete, Clearwater, and Largo, and all over the county can speak to the ones that are happening in their communities as well. So with that, again, thanks to the Sheriff's Office and our task force, and I'm very happy to report that our officer, both Officer Durr and Officer Casey Gavin, will return to duty. That's it.
Does anybody have any, do y'all have any questions?
Sheriff, you show the video of the
Right.
firing the weapon in the parking lot,
Right.
driving recklessly on Overton 275.
Yep.
Obviously, it's going to get much worse than it did. Talk about that really quickly, how thankful you all are that nobody lost their life.
Yeah, well, you know, as they would say, by the grace of God. I mean, this guy comes out, as you can see, it speaks for itself. He ambushed him and shot at Officer Durr and shot him. Officer Durr goes to the ground and he comes out and he fires 4 more times at him at very close range. As Officer Durr is on the ground and getting up and trying to flee, the man is going after him and shooting at him. So for whatever reason, and all I can do is thank God for it and say that sometimes the right thing happens, is that we'd be sitting here having a very different conversation with you all because we'd have a dead cop. And I'd say that if this guy had a different type of gun, a different crime gun, because that's what it is, we could be having a very different conversation because he only had 6 bullets and he ran out. His desire exceeded the round capacity that he had. There was no doubt that if he had more rounds, he would have fired more rounds. You can see by his comments there that even after the fact and several hours later of what he wanted to do. This is a guy who's the epitome of a true bad guy. This is a guy that has absolutely no care for anybody else, no regard for anybody else. And the men and women in law enforcement are out there protecting our community every single day, doing the hard work, doing the job that they're being paid to do, and doing it well, is that this guy says he wants to snuff them out. And he made every effort to do it and went after him even after he's down and shot in the arm and can't even protect himself. He still shoots at him. And so there could have been a lot worse. The driving could have resulted in a lot worse situation. We're very fortunate with Deputy Lundy. I say all. He's got a broken ankle. He's got shoulder injuries. That could have been a much worse situation down there. And as he was driving around St. Pete, he could have taken out all kinds of people in all kinds of cars. So, this was a bad situation, but it could have been a lot worse. No question, it could have been a lot worse. And it's something that should really give us all concern. We should all pause. When you're sitting in a convenience store like that victim from Texas, what would happen if that man didn't give him the keys, or he just went off? Because according to his girlfriend, he just goes off. He just snaps. We're very fortunate that he didn't just shoot him. But again, yes, it could have been a lot worse. But it's still bad.
The criminal justice system, obviously, there's failures here that are glaringly obvious. It's right there.
Well, I can tell you that one of the things that is also for some of those charges that were pending charges is that his girlfriend was a victim in some of those, and some of the reasons why the system couldn't deal with him after he got out of the Florida Department of Corrections, out of the state prison system, is because she wouldn't cooperate in the prosecution. So that plays into this as well. But when you got a guy that's been arrested as many times he has as a juvenile, as many arrests as he had during the 3 years he was on the street, and then he does 3 years in prison, and he comes out, and his first reaction is to engage in crime again and go sling dope all over St. Pete, where they got all these buys into him, and that's what he's doing, and he's got there with a gun and committing crime. I mean, he's a criminal, and he could care less about anybody else. So there's no question there's a problem here. And as Chief Hayworth said, this isn't an anomaly. I mean, anybody who thinks that this is an isolated case or this is a standalone, you're mistaken. Is that this is what cops across this state, across this county, across this country deal with every day. And, luckily, they nip some of these things. They deal with them through experience, through training. They don't get to this point. But this officer was ambushed. There was absolutely nothing he could have done other than what he did. And this is what cops do every day. You get a call, you respond, you walk up. The way he was walking up to that car, any single one of us would have done the exact same thing. There's nothing he could have done differently. He had to approach the car. And that guy moved, again, from the front seat to the back seat. There's a reason why he did that. You don't just sit in a car and then move from the front seat to the back seat. It's because he was getting an advantage. He was getting a drop on that cop, and he was going to kill the cop. And no question that that's what his intent was.
The girlfriend, the ex-girlfriend, she was still in the store at the time?
So she was in the store, and she was on the phone with the 911 call taker, as we call it, dispatcher. And so, and we've heard that. So she was on the phone talking to the dispatcher while the officers were responding, telling them so that they could, again, pass it on the best they could to the officers that were responding. So she went in there and purposely went right in the bathroom, locked herself in the bathroom, because she knew he's a violent guy. And she was scared of him. And she wouldn't want to be in that car after he went off on her and smacked her as they're riding to his kid's house over here in Rainbow Village. So this is a guy who's volatile. And she knew he was volatile, and she knew she needed to get away from him, and that's why she called the police.
And from the moment he shot at Officer Durr to the moment he was caught, how long, do you know how long that was?
You know, roughly, I would say, 15, 20 minutes. I mean, something in there, because it did go on for a while, because when he got off the interstate at 28th Street South, when he got off down in St. Pete, he was zigzagging a lot of streets down there in South St. Pete. So he was going fast, got on the interstate, like I said, 150 miles an hour, but when he got off, there was a lot of zigzag going down in there. So I'd estimate it's in that 15, 20-minute range.
For the drug charges that from March 21st to January of this year, was he taken into custody for those earlier this year, or were those charges also added when he was arrested?
Right, so those charges were just placed by St. Petersburg. He had not been taken into custody, and those charges were just placed by St. Petersburg Police Department as a result of his arrest from Tuesday night, which is not uncommon in drug investigations to make the buys, let them sit as they're furthering the investigation. So they had not, but again, you can see this is what the guy's doing. This is how he's, quote, making a living. It's not making a living, it's peddling poison in St. Pete. But look at all those counts. Look at what he's doing down there. And this is just what he was selling to cops. Look at all the other drug dealing he was probably doing where it wasn't to cops. This is what the guy was, that's why probably why he's carrying a gun. So he's a convicted felon in possession of a firearm out there slinging dope all over St. Pete. And he wants to go see his kids and beats up the woman who was taking him to go see his kids. And then she's scared, she calls the cops, and here we are. All right, anybody else got anything? All right, appreciate you coming out. Thank you.